I can. The other thing I like to do is I move my fingers like this.
Yeah.
And that reminds me that there is a lot in this moment that I have control over. So particularly if I'm about to do a presentation, or like we're speaking about speaking. So I want to go and, I speak to people about my experience, and I have really bad resting tremor, as you can imagine. So when I get anxious, my hand's going to do this. But reminding yourself that in this moment, with all this thoughts and feelings, and gosh, I'm struggling with all this stuff, there is a lot in this moment that I have control over. And if I could shift a little bit of my attention into what I actually have control over, whether it's like picking up this mug or touching my ear, it makes me realize that, shit, I'm not completely falling apart. As hard as things feel, there are some things that I can actually do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 11 of the High Performance Management Podcast. Today, I'm here with Rory Hession, who's a radio announcer, now turned mental health advocate, teaching you how to control your thoughts and feelings and work through anxiety. So we've got a really interesting one here because you are doing the opposite of what anxiety is, which is instead of retreating, you're going onto live radio. So
being the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It sounds funny, doesn't it? When I tell people, when I talk about, what I've been doing, and I say that, depression, anxiety, introverted, hates change, and then told people that I wanted to be a radio announcer, I think people looked at me like I was an idiot, to be fair. But yeah, that's right, man. I'm full-time radio announcer at the moment. I run what we call in the game a music shift. So I do a number of 3-hour shifts. One of them is across the entirety of WA, talking about music that's coming up, which at the moment is a lot of Ed Sheeran and a lot of Taylor Swift and a lot of Pink, and simultaneously, managing I don't like using the word chronic anxiety because it's probably misleading, but for just to identify with people who are listening, it is generalized anxiety disorder, which is a chronic type of anxiety. So
Yeah, especially and it's kind of what your whole point is that you've had to work through ways on how to deal with those thoughts. Because I feel like maybe enlighten us what generalized anxiety disorder is. That like a permanent change in the neurochemistry that causes you to think certain ways, or like dive into that a bit.
Generalized anxiety disorder, to say it in the most simple way, is you get worried about everything. So think of that, the most general, obvious things you could worry about. I actually was speaking to someone the other day, and I had a list of like funny things that I have worried about. But generally, generalized anxiety disorder is not a panic disorder, although you can experience, like I've had panic attacks with it before, or anxiety attacks, which is like a lower grade version of it. But effectively, it's just you have a bubbling anxiety. If you think of like a scale of 0 to 10, it normally just bubbles away to 3. So there's just this discomfort. And then you have triggers about general things. So they could be, if we talk about a panic disorder, let's say Jessica's got a panic disorder of the water. Every time she goes near the water, she gets a panic attack. Whereas generalized anxiety disorder really could be a number of things. So you could be anxious about, getting anxious, or anxious about not sleeping, or anxious about, leaving the stove on when you go out, or the hairdryer on. So it's really just anything that can kind of create like a bit of a spike in anxiety, and it always sort of sits there. When I describe it like that, it doesn't sound like it is, extremely intrusive and extremely complicated, but it really can be, because it's very hard to manage when there's a large range of things that make you anxious, for example.
Yeah. So, and how long have you been dealing with this for? Is this something you've had for a long time? Was there a moment in time where it just kicked in and you're like, fuck, okay.
So when I was a little boy, I had separation anxiety. That's the earliest thing that I can remember. I had separation anxiety, and I had sleep anxiety, really bad sleep anxiety. So if I couldn't get to sleep and I knew that everyone else was awake, I'd get really, really anxious. And then it would filter down to anything that could keep me awake. So, and my mum will laugh about this, but I used to get into bed And if there was a crease in the sheet and I knew that it was going to affect my ability to sleep, I would have a panic attack. And the funny thing is that as a child, and obviously this is quite common with, a lot of kids, and, I'm 31, so a lot of kids in my generation, it's quite similar. There's a lot of things that you experienced as a kid that you then look back on in your 30s and said, oh, that's what this was. So I think I've had anxiety, or generalized anxiety, or just this experience with anxiety ever since I was a kid. And it's just sort of snowballed, along. I used to get anxious about everything. If there was a mark on my arm, I'd think like, oh no, I've got cancer or something. And, your mind just goes there. So I've had anxiety all through my life, but it's probably more that I got diagnosed, to use that word loosely, in my early to mid 20s, when it became so obvious to me that you couldn't really look the other way. So I would say I've had it all my life, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now, before you've gotten into radio broadcasting, what was the type of roles you're doing? Because you said you've done it for about 6 years now. Is that right?
Yep.
And so before that, when you've gotten this diagnosis and you're feeling anxiety, what was kind of that pathway into, you're like kind of facing your demons, hero's journey type of deal, or what's that about?
So in my early to mid 20s, I had an explosion of all these really difficult thoughts and feelings. So I had chronic insomnia for about 6 months. So I'd sleep 2 days a week. I used to be awake for probably 2 or 3 days a week at least. So that was what I call the explosion, or I describe it to people as, the real world came knocking. I sort of exposed to the real visceral impact of, what anxiety can give you, and obviously the depression side of things. And ironically, at that point, I already knew that I wanted to get involved in radio. The way that it came about was very bizarre. When I was at high school, I was actually quite badly bullied. And one of the things that I turned to, like a lot of kids, was playing video games. And I got really good at it. And I ended up playing competitively on Call of Duty 4. Like, we were part of a team, sponsored. And when you play those games, there's people who commentate the game. I know it sounds ridiculous. And I actually started doing that. And that's really ironically, and it's such a weird story, but that's where my love for wanting to broadcast came from. So just to fast forward, when I'm in my mid 20s and I'm struggling at the height of all this sort of stuff, that love for wanting to do it didn't go away. There was just a lack of, a real question mark hanging over my head about saying like, well, if I want to do that and I want to, do those things, I can't have this side of me at the same time.
So was that like a real struggle for you? You had this need, this desire that came to you from a young age, and you got a lot of emotion attached to it, but then you just see this big roadblock, like, if I get bloody anxiety about a mark on my arm, how the hell am I going to speak to people all around Australia?
100%.
Yeah.
100%, because those of us who do, and my wife doesn't have any anxiety, so it can be really hard to, there's very hard to empathize sometimes. But when you're having snowballing worries that, sometimes you'd be sitting at the table like this and someone's talking to you and I wouldn't hear a word they said, or you just burst into tears because you're so exhausted or you can't sleep. It's hard to imagine how you can do a radio show or talk on radio content when you've got all of that going on in the background. Because unfortunately, the way it works with, the creative arts and especially live entertainment is you can't fake things. Like, it's very hard to fake things. When you're on TV or when you're on radio, like, whatever your behavior is coming through the microphone, it's coming through the camera lens. So yeah, it was a massive, massive obstacle for me at that time, thinking like, how the hell am I going to do this when I've got all this other stuff going on? And that's why a lot of us go down that really common road of, avoiding our pain. A lot of us get involved in eating or drinking or, watching TV or mulling out, just trying to control or get rid of those things or push the thoughts and feelings away. Anything you can do so you can go and focus on that thing that you want to do, which for me was radio. Fortunately, those things don't work. It didn't work for me. So yeah, to answer your question, it was freaking terrifying. And especially all my friends and family, as much as I love them, and it's not their fault because it's a very hard thing to understand. We're saying, well, you've got to get rid of this stuff so you can go and do this thing. You can't have that and do this. So yeah, it was very scary.
What was kind of the first step for you getting, I don't know if you ever got better or maybe it's got better with dealing with it. What was that first step into moving into the right direction?
So I describe it like this, and without going into too much detail, there was, at my lowest point, I wanted to end my life. So I ended up in hospital, in the mental health ward of the hospital. The thing is, though, as much as I wanted to, I couldn't do it. So I physically could not do it. And I never forget this conversation that I had with my stepfather at the time. He called me that night when I got back home. And this is a guy that was in the Marine Corps. So he's been through a lot of death, surrounded by it. And he literally said to me on the phone, he said, "You couldn't do it, could you?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, now you know what you need to do, right?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what to do." "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you've got to learn to live with it because this is your life now." That was probably the most powerful moment for me, where I realized
that is massive. Hey,
yeah. I can't go down that road, and I would obviously never advise anyone go down that road because you're missing out on so much that life has to offer. But for me, that life well lived blueprint of, how you're supposed to do things and how life is supposed to be did not apply for me. So my option moving forward, with a lot of, help from seeing psychologists and reading up about, therapies that subscribe to me and educating myself about how my mind works, was, okay, how do I can sit here and do nothing and just mull out, avoid it, just deal with the pain and not go and do anything. Or I can take the pain with me and go after the things that I think are really important to me. And that was the decision that I made. So that kickstarted actively pursuing the radio career. So
yeah. And so you had to hit that rock bottom for you to realize how important it was for you to actually do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because part of the rock bottom is the culmination of really ineffective management strategies when it comes to the pain that we deal with. Substance abuse, eating, drinking is so unbelievably common. They put us in a much worse spiral. So it was actually, okay, how do I take that pain that I've got and know that it is part of me, and I'm not going to put all my energy into trying to get rid of it, but put my energy into what's happening in life, like the things that I want to do. And you only realize that sometimes by hitting the bottom and realizing, oh shit, like this is what's important, all this stuff. I want to live a life.
That's a really important thing that you said there, in taking a part of you and accepting it, because you've probably had to go through it as well, like in psychology, individuation, when you're taking, or what Jung calls it, the shadow, and you're integrating that shadow part. Is that kind of what you mean? Like you got to that understanding that you've got this part of you that's always probably going to be there. You just, like, that's like me, my depression, like mine was more depression than anxiety. Well, it was anxiety, but turned into depression. But like, I felt like for a while it was just never going to end. I just kept like what you're saying, I just kept trying to avoid it and be like, I just put it down. And then it wasn't until I was like, hey, this is probably, like, I just gave up almost. I was like, whatever, like it's there. Like, hey buddy, I see you there. Like, I'm just going to live with you. And like, as soon as I did that, I just took my attention off of like the pain points of it happening. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, it just is. It's really important. And so when you went from there, what was like 2 or 3 of the biggest like actionable things that you learned through that process? Because obviously anxiety is, if you don't have the tools to overcome your thoughts, which impact your feelings, and you're just purely reactive, you're never going to get out of it. So what are some of the things you were doing at that point? Especially when you had the rock bottom, you're still in those bad patterns.
Yeah. By being in that rock bottom environment, it made me realize that how I was relating to my mind was A, not working, or was B, bankrupt. So I started to, the afterthought of that was exploring a new relationship and learning as much as I could about my mind, as I said. And the things that I realized was, you spoke about your depression before. was realizing that we have a really toxic relationship with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. That was, if you ask about the biggest takeaway that I ever had, it was that. That's the first thing. One of two things. That's the first thing. It's understanding that how I view my pain as toxic, negative, evil. Ironically, that pain is part of me. Anxiety tells me something. When you're in a cyclical sadness, which is what we call depression, it's really just a sadness about feeling sad. That's also telling you something. And by actually, we kind of see our pain like this, and this is what I was doing when I had anxiety, like in the depths of that anxiety disorder, whereas the change is going like this. So it's bringing the pain in and saying, you're part of me and you're part of this experience, and you're not this foreign evil part of me. You're just maybe a part that's going a bit overboard, or, trying to communicate something a bit loud. So that was the first thing, changing my relationship with really uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. And then realizing that difficult thoughts and feelings don't actually hold you back from acting. This life that I wanted to live is not one that is just happy. It's the pain and it's my effective action. I think if you look at all the amazing people in history who've achieved phenomenal things, Winston Churchill is a great example. And a lot of people actually don't know that, but Winston Churchill had bipolar, was incredibly depressed.
No, I didn't know that. Yeah.
This is the time before antidepressants. This is a man who was leading Britain through probably the most depressive period in history, just after the fall of France in 1940. And he used to have to stand when he was waiting for a train, and he says this, he used to stand with the kind of pillars of the train between him and the train because he was worried he might jump in front of the train. And that's why we have this term called Black Dog Institute. He coined that. He called his depression his black dog. So again, we speak about creating this different relationship with our pain. This is something that is part of me, and I can choose to sit there and fight it, or I can accept that it's part of me and I can go and act for the things that are most important. So that's what I
So I just had a mind blow moment. That's I've heard of it, and I just haven't had it in that sequence of thoughts before.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Parts and integrating those parts, but like calling it a black dog, it's actually a good technique. Yeah, because then you can see your thoughts actually manifesting into an item. And then like a dog, it's like, oh, okay, like you're just an angry dog, like maybe
barking at you.
Yeah, like that's
if you had a dog that you like a pound dog that you picked up that was just really aggressive, but had good intentions at the same time. Didn't bite, just barked.
Yeah.
And barking at you. I actually call my anxiety my monkey, because I imagine that my mind is, one of those little toy monkeys with the symbols like this, who's had like Simpsons. 3 lines of cocaine, and he's just like, oh shit, man, we need to fucking stop worrying or we're going to fall apart. That's what I imagine my mind is like. So same naming technique. And I think that Bill Hader calls his, from SNL, he uses the same technique with his anxiety.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it's changing your relationship with your pain and knowing that you can take your pain with you and you can do things with your pain. That's the other thing that's so important.
I know a few people in my personal life who are very high achievers, and I assume like yourself as well, you wouldn't have got to the level in your career you are without being a high achiever.
Yeah,
but they do just deal with that, and like sometimes it shuts them down. What are some like when you like, you could be hearing this right now and be like, oh yeah, I understand, but then when you're in the moment, what is some things that someone listening who's experiencing that can do to kind of quickly shift out of that you've used in the past?
Okay, someone that's experiencing those like kind of intrusive cyclical thoughts and feelings. Okay, so the first thing that I always say to people is it's a very simple exercise called it's just like a self-compassion exercise, and self-compassion's got a really kind of stupid reputation, but it's imagining that you put a palm of your hand like as if a loved one was touching you, and you just mentally kind of open yourself up to the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings you're experiencing. And the reason that you do that, number one, is because, and again, I'm subscribing to a type of therapy called acceptance therapy, because I believe that there are some parts of us that we experience that we can't push away. So by doing this, and I get when you're in public, right, walking through the shops like this looks a bit weird. So you can actually I sometimes put my hand, in my pocket on my leg or something, but you give yourself support to say, hey, you're experiencing something that is objectively a bit shit. You know, if you're going through depression and anxiety, it's not roses, it's shit. It's uncomfortable. So you give yourself, you remind yourself that you're there for you during this period of feeling uncomfortable. The other thing that I like to do is, so that kind of takes the struggle out of things, because you kind of default into wanting to go in and solve things. So that's giving you a sense of, this is uncomfortable, don't have to fix this right now. Let's just make room for the pain that's showing up as patiently as I can and as much as I can. The other thing I like to do is I move my fingers like this.
Yeah.
And that reminds me that there is a lot in this moment that I have control over. So particularly if I'm about to do a presentation, or like we're speaking about speaking. So I want to go and, you know, I speak to people about my experience, and I have really bad resting tremor, as you can imagine. So when I get anxious, my hands kind of do this. But reminding yourself that in this moment, with all this thoughts and feelings, and gosh, I'm struggling with all this stuff, there is a lot in this moment that I have control over. And if I could shift a little bit of my attention into what I actually have control over, whether it's like picking up this mug or touching my ear, it makes me realize that, shit, I'm not completely falling apart. As hard as things feel, there are some things that I can actually do.
That's right.
And sort of reconnecting with action is really important, because a lot of what I tell people is the things that bring you fulfillment in life, the things that, you know, you obviously you speak a lot about values and knowing what your values are. You know, pursuing your values and connecting with your values is all down to action, very much all down to action. So you can feel uncomfortable, but if your loved one says, hey, I really want to go to the beach, and one of your values is, you know what, I really care about my loved one, and, you know, I think deep down the experience of going to the beach might be fun, even though I don't want to go, I can act. Even though this is saying, don't go, you're going to fall apart, I can act. And it's the actions and the things that we do, which most often are bringing us fulfillment in life, because they're linked to our values. So those are the two things.
That's very true. Because you find I personally, when I am in a state of inaction, I actually experience the most depression, anxiety. It's not until you start moving and you're like, oh, cool, I actually did that. That was pretty cool. And then it's like you just get this dopamine release and you start feeling a bit better. Yeah.
I challenge anybody
with action.
I challenge anybody, and there are times and places, you know, if you're literally in the middle of having a panic attack, I would not tell people, hey, just go out somewhere. You know, you do have to, there has to be a sense of emotional intelligence about what you're experiencing. But in my experience, every single time I've had something that says like, oh, you know, don't go out and do this because, you know, you're feeling like this, you need to withdraw or something. After I complete that action and I look back on that experience, I think, oh, I'm so glad that I did that. That was actually really fulfilling. I might not have felt amazing the whole time, but I'm so glad in retrospect that I went and made that decision. So yeah, I think action is massive, but obviously, as I said, it is equally as important, and it gets overlooked a lot, is especially for people who I can say who don't have a carer, might be living on their own, they might not have a support network, creating that relationship that you can look after yourself and actually have a sense of care for yourself, you know, just being there for yourself. Hey, this is a tough time that I'm going through is massive. It's really big. So yeah.
That was awesome. I think I really resonated with what you're saying about reconnect with action, taking control when you feel out of control and just shifting that focus. That was really good there. I think, I know we talked about this before, so I've got the context, but that last 20, 30 minutes was really like awesome. But I don't think people listening are going to realize that the actual level in your broadcasting that you're doing is quite high. It's not like you're in some like basement talking to, you know, like some niche community like you did in COD. So like talk a little bit about that, because like, this is kind of your entry. You hit the rock bottom, you climbed out, you got some tools, you understood how to have a better relationship with those uncomfortable feelings and thoughts. And now you're going into like actually an anxiety producing job, especially in media, I can imagine is pretty, you know, high standard. So how did you transition into that? And maybe just do a bit of, you know, how did you even start? What was that first role look like 6 years ago?
Yeah, so the first role was in a small town in South Australia called Port Augusta, that I think was named the second worst town in Australia. People called it Port Augusta. It was not the nicest place to live, but that was my first radio show. Small town, no, my nearest family is in Brisbane, so a long way away. So it really, my career was, and it was worthwhile because, as I said to you before we started this, that's where I met my wife. So yay. And it kicked off my radio career. But these are like small. What happened for the next 2 years was very small regional postings. That's how it works in the media industry. You start regional, you get the skills, and then you get to the big game, which in the radio industry is called, we call it Metro. It's just radio and TV, they call it Metro. You hear it thrown around a lot, like, oh, you made it to Metro, because Metro is where all the money is. It's where all the advertising is. You have surveys that come out with who's listening to what station, which dictates who's going to spend money. There's a lot more writing on it, and the audience is much bigger. So you have more of an influence, and with that comes much more stress. And the media industry now typically is quite understaffed for what it's trying to do, which is pretty common. But the point that I got into it, it was, you had your job. So I just sort of migrating a bit forward. I got a metropolitan job here in Perth, working for Southern Cross Austereo, which is the biggest radio company in Australia, as a daytime music announcer. So 3-hour shift, you talk between a few songs, you sell competitions, giving away tickets, you keep people listening to the radio. You get, an advertising picture put on so they can send it to advertisers and say, during Rory's shift, he brought in 18,000 listeners. So yada, yada, yada. There's much more pressure. There's more people listening, as I said. And without going into too much detail, if you make a mistake, compared to being in a regional town where you could probably say the F word and get away with it, in a metropolitan station, something goes wrong, you're going to hear about it in the next 5-10 seconds. Someone will text you, someone will call you. You don't do something well enough, someone's going to come in and tell you.
And then someone with generalized anxiety disorder like yourself getting scared about marks. Yes. That sounds like a whole fun game to play.
So this is the most fascinating thing, because I learned a few strategies, and when I got to Metropolitan Radio, I'm faced with this situation of I need to deliver and I need to perform.
Yeah.
And
it's not good if you don't.
No, and I have this thing which I've been managing up until now pretty well. But what happened is I started working for Metropolitan Radio and I had an explosion of anxiety. Because as I like to tell people, you don't want a feeling, you've got it. Okay. If you don't want to feel something, you're going to have it very quickly. And I didn't want anxiety, and I ended up with anxiety, a lot of it.
Yeah.
So
that cocaine monkey's back.
Yeah, in my
another line,
and right in front of my face, like while I'm trying to see what I'm doing, he's just yelling in my face. So, I was faced with doing talk breaks, where my voice was tremoring. I was crying between talk breaks. I had a panic attack while I was selling a competition. I remember that. I physically could not press the play button, so I kind of had to keep talking. And you ever had a panic attack, you can't think properly. So I was faced with this situation, almost like anxiety 2.0, but in a much more high stressful environment. You can't have anxiety because people are going to hear it. You can't have anxiety because you need to perform, and you can't have anxiety because the future of your career depends on you managing your thoughts and feelings, right?
So now you're anxious about being anxious.
100%. Yeah. Welcome to generalized anxiety disorder. Just yet another thing to generally be worried about. So yeah, that's the situation that I was in when I made it to the biggest game in the radio industry. I'd made it to where I wanted to be, and I was experiencing something that I don't think I was really, really prepared for. Yeah. So I had tools to manage things, but this is very different. Very different.
So how many people were listening when you're in Port Augusta?
Port Augusta had a population of 14,000 people. The surrounds was probably about 30,000. I'd probably say that, oh gosh, I don't know. You had to have a stab because obviously people are listening to different kind of podcasts and stuff. I'd probably say like your cume, which is your total audience, was probably around 15 to 20,000.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And then moving up to Metro, like I have no idea. This is something I've not even considered before. What's Metro?
I'd probably say 400,000 or 500,000.
Far out. That's full on.
That's
Is that
that's
stuff you
roughest.
thought about as well? Like your anxiety monkey was saying, hang on, you're speaking to 500,000 people now. Like
there's no weirder feeling than chucking the mic light on and hearing silence and watching cars driving down the road past you on the highway and thinking they can hear what I'm saying right now.
whoa,
And
yeah.
That's what came through my head at the beginning. And if I F this up, they're going to hear these guys right here. And then
honk at me.
It's in here in Perth. It's like it's a main road with a traffic light. So sometimes they'd be stopped there.
Is that the one in Subi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd be sitting there looking, and when I first got there, going, "Oh my god, this is," and it was fun, but it was terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Which sort of migrates to, I guess, the biggest transformation and how to manage it. And the thing that I realized, there's two pieces of advice that I gave you before about, accepting your thoughts and feelings, whatever they are, and taking effective action. I might have thought about them back then, but this is when I really started.
Yeah, you got to do it, eh?
Yeah. That's when I started to do them. So, it was and in fact, I think it was my therapist that said to me, he said, what's your favorite part of the job? I said, oh, it's just playing around, having fun. He said, well, just be that. And I was like, but I've got all these people listening. He's like, yeah, they can listen. Just do that. And I literally, and it's something that I talked to him and I did. I'd get a cup like this, say that this is the panel. I get a cup and I go, this is my anxiety, right? I'm just going to put him just there, right?
Yeah.
He's going to sit there with me and I'm going to do the show. And what I realized,
that's something you actually did.
Yeah, I get a mug every day. Just get a mug and I put him beside the show. And when I'd notice something quite heavy coming up, I'd be like, oh yeah. And I'd like pat the mug. Thank you. All good. There's actually, these are psychological skills that people have preached before. There's a thing called thanking your mind. So it's like a hybridization of that. But I just pat the mug and go, yeah, thank you. All good. Because I knew that I wanted to do this thing and this thing was here. And I'd fallen back into the trap of going, of having it in front of my face like this and thinking I need to get rid of that, but I knew I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's just a sense of doing the show with the anxiety that was here, rather than having it here in front of me, having it sitting beside me like that. And so every single show that I've done for the past year and a half, when I was on Metro Radio here in Perth I still am, but I was on for probably about a year and a half. Every single show I was anxious, but every single show I had fun, I played, there was excitement, and there was the anxiety. So it was everything. Everything was there. It's not just the anxiety, but every part of the moment was there.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of reframing, a lot of just dealing with it. And what it sounds like as well, like just because I'm maybe shooting ahead here, but
you're right.
you do have like an outcome based thinking as well, right? Like because you'd be going in thinking, I want to, like, you've achieved quite a success in broadcasting. Like you would be like, okay, I want to provide to the listeners like a certain level. Is that also like something that you consider going in? Because we talk about all these strategies to, maintain the anxiety, but then the other side is like the kind of trajectory and allowing you to move into like a better state of mind or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you do other stuff like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a sense of, there's always a sense of saying like, can I do better if I don't have this? If I manage this better, can I do better with this? Can I get to where I want to get to and do a more effective job if I don't have this as loud as it is with me? My experience, particularly with me and everything that I've done, is no. Because as I said, every single time I say, I don't want this and I could do better without it, it just goes. And if I accept that it's part of me and sit it there with me, it becomes less. And again, I'm subscribing to the tenets of a type of, some people might not subscribe to this, there are different types of psychological practice that do help with anxiety for certain people. But for me, it was learning to accept it as part of my experience. And I think this is really, really important. It's not only just for anxiety sufferers, but it's for people who are wanting to do something that is aligned to their values and important to them, but they're inevitably going to feel uncomfortable about it. I mean, you've spoken, I'm not sure if this is on record, but you got a speakers conference coming up.
Yeah.
Right. Which you're probably scared shitless about. Yeah. But you can take effective action, be the person that you want to be, do the things you want to do, and take that with you.
Yeah.
It doesn't completely dictate what you do next, but it doesn't mean you push it away either.
Yeah.
A lot of this healthy fear is healthy fear. You take it with us and do things. So, that's my experience and what I do. And obviously being in quite a high-paced environment is I could only do the best job that I could possibly do in that when I realized that this was part of me and coming with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, because it sounds like, you've done like a lot of work in this area. You've seen a lot of professionals. When with like, do you set goals around your mental health?
I did.
Yeah. Like talk us through that, because I think that's like a real practical thing as well. Like I had to do it a lot, at first when I was learning about the mind and why I felt certain ways. I kept seeing, just understand your thoughts, hear your thoughts. And I swear on my life, I had no fucking idea what that even meant. I was like, what do you mean hear your thoughts? And so like, I think the first like awareness I had of thoughts was like from Brendan Burchard. And he said, just ask yourself 3 times a day, randomly, what am I thinking? And then it's like, that was like a goal I was setting. But like, is there's stuff that you do with that?
What you just mentioned is really, really interesting because, and I'd say the same thing to anybody else who's trying to understand, people who are experiencing anxiety for the first time have not developed, and I've just had a completely mental blank about what part of the brain it is. I feel like it's the something system. The SNS system, your sympathetic nervous system, is the one that obviously is the one that is trigger happy with stress. There's another part of your brain, which I'm forgetting. I think it's part of the limbic system.
Emotional regulation,
which is a part of you that is able to actually actively evaluate what's going on. It's almost like some people call it your observing self. Like you and I who are sitting here, you notice what you're saying, but also you're observing. There's a sense of you that's like sitting behind yourself, observing what you're doing. So when people start trying to understand their thoughts and feelings, it's freaking hard because you haven't really developed that part of your brain. So when you're saying like, I don't know how to hear thoughts, what do you mean? It's because you haven't trained that. So for people when you talk about goal setting, I think it is quite important to say, particularly around me, goal setting was like seeing a therapist regularly. And, if you're seeing a good therapist, and I tell everyone that I think everyone should see a therapist, to be honest, that your therapist, if they're good, will give you things to work on between sessions, right? But I think the greatest teacher of managing or learning about your mental health or the way your mind works is life and its experience, because this shit just brings things out that you can try and force things and say, okay, this week I think it's important if you're trying to understand practical things like you want to learn how to do mindfulness better, do some mindfulness practices and things like that. Saying, okay, in a month's time I want to be doing this at least 3 times a week. Goal setting can be really difficult with people who have mental health issues sometimes, because if you say, okay, I want to be much better at dealing with my anxiety in a month. And a month comes around and you're in a hole and you're thinking,
I'm a piece of shit.
I'm a piece of shit. Whereas the reality is, and you ask anybody who's been through this over the course of a year, couple of good experiences, something bad happens you weren't ready for. Like, for example, I also have ADHD, because I probably have all the things at this rate, let's be honest. And I get really triggered by sound, by noise, and that makes me anxious. So if I'm in an apartment and upstairs is making noise, new people move in, I get really anxious about it. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because that's an experience that I didn't really know how to deal with effectively. So I had to go through that to learn, okay, yeah, there's a way of responding more effectively to that. So I tell people, if you're seeing a therapist regularly, you're taking effective action about being responsible, because this is the biggest hurdle with mental health. It's, I don't do anything about it. If you're seeing a therapist and you're being accountable for it, you are playing with time. You are just playing the long game, because you've been thinking the same way for 25 years and you've been seeing a therapist for 8 months. Bro, be patient. You know, be patient, because you're going to go through all these experiences and life's going to throw something at you. You're going to go, oh my God, I don't know how to deal with that. That is another tool. To learn. So next time that happens, you're doing better at dealing with it. So to answer your question, yes, I think goal setting can be quite important when it comes to your mental health. Just to have some regiment about, you know, doing things or saying like, ding, ding, oh, it's my time to learn. You know, I need to sit in the chair for 5 minutes and just observe my thoughts and feelings. So that's good practice. When it comes to goal setting about outcomes for managing mental health, I think sometimes it can be really, I think you need to trust the uncertainty of the process. As shit as that sounds, I think that's probably the most important thing that I would tell people. Particularly for me, because again, I was fine in regional markets dealing with my anxiety. I landed in metro, boom. There's this big thing that I didn't know how to deal with.
Massive.
And
has that subsided? Because like I know you can like anything new, you'll have that, like you said, healthy anxiety. You know, me going on stage is keeping me up. But you know, when you go through it enough times, has it subsided? You kind of get a baseline like anxiety instead of like a peak.
So, and again, I come back to the earlier example, and it's not every case, but generally, anxiety disorders are typified by feeling anxious about feeling anxious. But you know, panic attacks for going on the water, you're anxious about getting a panic attack on the water. If you're anxious about sleep, you're anxious about getting anxious while you sleep. So there's a behavioral cycle there. So I'd say what you learn how to do is you learn how to respond more effectively when this comes up. So rather than change it, you learn more effectively about what comes up. So for me, yes, certainly it's much better when I'm on air now, because I have a better relationship with my thoughts and feelings. That doesn't mean I'm controlling them or trying to push them away, but it means inevitably, because I'm much more open and I've sort of developed that kind of relationship with them, much more pleasant relationship with them, the after effects of the feelings are not as heavy. They're not as intrusive. So, but that's not to say, this is when it becomes a mind fuck. It's not to say that, and you talked about results-based thinking. This is not to say that if I do X, Y, and Z, then this is going to happen, because that doesn't work with anxiety.
Yeah, especially if you put like an expectation on it.
Yeah,
that's something to feel anxious about too.
Yeah, it's just pleasant. You know, pleasant feelings are just a byproduct of effective, you know, psychological practices. Like for me, it's accepting and going, okay, you're here, come with me. They're less intense because my relationship with them is better, to say. But it's not that I have lessened the impact of anxiety on purpose. I've just learned how to relate to it better. And I think it's like so useful, because, you know, one day, you know, you're talking about doing a speaking, you know, conference. I'm going to be doing that, not a speaking conference, but I'm going to be speaking for people in the future. And that's going to be scary. And I'm going to be a father one day, which is not, my wife's not pregnant, so hold on. But one day I expect, that's also freaking terrifying. And that's going to bring heaps of anxiety. And my goal is not to go, no, I don't want that. It's to go, okay, how can I relate better to that when we call them emotional storms, right? When those really uncomfortable waves are crashing over, how can I stay a bit more buoyant and, you know, surf the emotions that I'm feeling? So, yeah.
I think that's a good one as well. When you get those big waves and how to stay buoyant, are there, like, I know, you know, there's some things that just aren't practical. You just get used to it over time, especially if you're aware of those patterns. But like, do you do journaling and things like that through that? Having a support network, obviously seeing a therapist, like.
So like practical thing, I think journaling is really, really good. I don't do it as much now because obviously I label my anxiety triggers as stories, and like they're like chapters of a book, dude. Like I know them off by heart. Like, oh yeah, this is chapter 6. I'm a piece of shit. Like you just know, you know what I mean? Whereas I think, but I did journal for a long time, and I think journaling is really, really good because you after a really heavy day, I guess you can sit down there, you can put, especially if you don't have someone around you that you can always like communicate with.
Yeah.
Or you just don't want to dump on them all the time. Like, oh, like this is my day. You can actually look at those pieces of paper and go, oh, this is like the same things come up a few days in a row. This seems like a bit of a theme. So you start to, and then, as I said, you're developing this part of your brain, right? So you'd be out and you go, oh yeah, I've noticed this is this thing from the other day. It's showing up. And you get a bit of separation between you and your mind. So I think journaling is really, really good. Seeing a therapist, seeing a bunch of them, okay? Like seeing one and going, oh, it doesn't click, going to this one, oh, that clicks, and finding and there is always a method that works for different people is probably the most important thing you can do. It doesn't mean you're broken. It just means that you're taking proactive steps about managing your mental health. I think everybody needs to see one just from a basic standpoint, because we have so many ideas wrong about how we respond.
Yeah.
So journaling, seeing a therapist, and the other thing that is like super, super important is just, even if you can't change it, is acknowledging what your avoidance strategies are, right? How you are avoiding pain in your day-to-day life. And again, it doesn't happen immediately. One thing for me is eating. I eat if I'm struggling.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you get like avoidance strategies? What are some common ones?
So there's,
and what makes them avoidance?
So I call an avoidance strategy anything that doesn't work in the long term. Some people call them control strategies, but they're avoidance strategies. They're anything that you use in the long term to avoid or help you with your thoughts and feelings that don't work. Avoidance strategies, okay, or control strategies. So things that leave you feeling more unfulfilled and your struggle's still there. So a great one is eating food. Sometimes they work. We think that because you've had a bad day at work and you eat some food, it makes you feel better. That then can work for the more complex psychological minutiae. It doesn't. You ask anyone, and you probably say the same thing. You go on a binging spree to try and feel better. You never feel better. You feel worse. Now you just feel even worse because now you know you've put on weight from eating. So food is one. Drinking alcohol is quite common as well. This is how people become alcoholics, because they start drinking to feel better, and then they become reliant on the drink to feel better. But now they're also dealing with the after effects of being an alcoholic, which feels a lot worse. So, and then obviously there's very entrenched psychological ones like feel happy and think positive thoughts and get rid of your negative thoughts. Do that. But as we've learned through, like I can do it with you right now. Like, try not think of this beautiful pink elephant.
Yeah, the pink elephant. Yeah.
And try not to think about it for 30 seconds. You can't, can you? No, because try to do that with your partner's just left you after 2 years. Try to get that thought out of your mind. You're fucked. It's there, bro. It's staying there. So there's those are what I would call avoidance strategies.
It does all just come down to like you were saying before, the experiences of life bring it out of you. And but that's the whole thing. I think that's what I love about psychology, because like the development of our mind and emotions is through the experiences we have. But then we get this like weird disconnect that like when we have an experience that is perceived as bad, that it's like painful. When really it's like, if you start to look at it as, well, there's something I'm developing through this. Like I find that so interesting. Like off topic a little bit, I read this book about how fear, what's it called? Right here. How the fear of death shapes society, and the whole thing about the fear of death is what created legacies and what created the like character traits of like narcissism an ego. It was because we were actually just fearful of death. So you wanted to be like a peacock, or you wanted to leave, some statue, or you want to dominate some. It's so interesting that like those experiences formulate the way that our actual mind is. And it's like, yeah, you're right. Avoiding them, you're missing out on that development.
It's like, what pain do you want to have? Because there's no problem-free life, man. There are just problems worth solving, but there's no way of getting away with pain. You have the pain of staying where you are, feeling uncomfortable as shit and not achieving what you want to achieve, or just connecting with the people you want to connect with, or you have the pain of going out and feeling a bit, uncomfortable as you go and do those things. Which one do you want? I know which one I want. It can be hard sometimes to realize. It's easy to tell people when you're going through it, something very different, but acknowledging that, just because we think that because we're going through something that no one else is, we are all going through shit.
Yeah.
Justin, I can't remember, I think it was like 2017, Justin Bieber crashed I don't know if you remember this, Justin Bieber was drag racing a friend in his Lamborghini down in California, and he got arrested by the cops for speeding, and he was high on marijuana at the same time.
How'd you get done for speeding?
Oh, because you're going 140 in a Lamborghini and you're Justin Bieber. But the thing that's funny about this is a kid who has like millions of dollars, can pick up a model whenever he wants to. He is set for life, and mentally was struggling so much. So if he's like that, with all the shit that he's got, we're fucked. We're always gonna have pain. It's always gonna be there, You're not broken because you have it. And again, my experience of working in radio is that it was so transformative for me. It was, I can take that with me and still experience all these amazing things. I think that's massive. To change the relationship of how we see our pain, It's not a pain-free life.
And now you're going into a whole new phase, for all the listeners listening / watching. I met Rory at a public speaking seminar, which is again a whole nother thing, and a little bit about me. Like, I had crippling social anxiety as a kid. I had to count my steps because I, for some reason, thought everyone was watching me and would think, oh, that guy's walking out of sync. Weird. Right? Like, I don't know what that was, but now we're here, speaking in front of a group of people about our weird problems in life. And it's, so your next step now is, you make great videos on Instagram. And are you on TikTok?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say, I feel like you got a TikTok vibe that would go real good.
My TikTok, the other thing that I'm sort of also, because I've been through a lot of dysfunctional workplaces as well. So part of mine is, you're probably about to say this, I'm cutting you off, but it's helping people create a more healthy relationship with their thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Which again is the vibe of this whole chat, really, when you think about it. So you can go after what's most important to you, but also helping people sort of recognize and help people in dysfunctional workplaces who are struggling with their mental health. So ironically, on TikTok, that shit's massive. Like, for some reason, I don't know why they love it on TikTok, but on Instagram, it's more geared toward one or the other. So yeah.
No, I found that as well. There is like a difference. I've just been posting the same videos on both, but like, I know there's probably a better way to do it. But yeah, and so your next thing now is what you're wanting to have a little bit of a change in broadcasting, move more into the mental health space. Is that right?
Yeah. So I want to obviously use this experience that I've leveraged. And I want to use the skills that I've leveraged and the experience that I've gained, through the last 6 years to help other people. Because I think the thing that I started to notice, I'm telling you this now, and obviously, like, you're much more susceptible when you recognize, because we are in pretty much the same industry. Like, we're open to, thoughts and, different ways of psychology and how it helps people. But when I went through this myself, and looking at it, talking to other people don't think this way. We have really self-destructive relationships with our minds, and we have very, very conditioned, archaic views of how we're supposed to think. And so what I want to do is I want to help people to at least come to some similar understanding that I'm at. Bare baseline, just be more compassionate to yourself. That's like, if I could get people just to wake up in the morning or fuck something up and go, oh, I fucked that up. That's all good. I'm going to be kind to myself. I reckon that would solve like 20% of problems. But yeah, I just want to, use that experience. And I'm keeping my shit together here, but I'm weird. My content creation is it can be very weird. And
what's your tag? Your tagline is
it was the
mental health.
weird mental health advocate. Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, I can be sometimes the references. People don't get the references. One of the things I used to hear in radio all the time was like, you're thinking it's too complicated, it's too niche, it's too like I'm like, oh, this creative thing, and then this thing happens, and they're like, no, people don't think like that. So I think sometimes maybe my messaging gets a little bit misunderstood, but I think helping people understand it in the weirdest possible way, I think, is really cool.
Yeah. No, I feel weird subjective though, right?
I love weird. I think I'm about it. I think weird was a bad thing, but like, why would you want to be the same as everyone else? You know, we've all got something. There's something that we can do that no one else can do. You might love, I don't know, you might love Hello Kitty. I don't know. Hello Kitty is your thing. You froth Hello Kitty. Fuck yeah, more yellow Hello Kitty in my life. And people think that's a bad thing, but that's your thing, and you can do that thing and help other people with their awareness of Hello Kitty. Can't believe I'm talking about Hello Kitty, but yeah,
that's the beauty about the internet now. There's opportunity for so much you can do. Like there's people like I don't know how I watched a bunch of random shit on YouTube. I came across this guy. He's got like 4 million subscribers. All he builds is ant farms.
Yeah, I'll say that.
Like ant terrariums, and I'm like, this guy's making like hundreds of thousands of dollars just ants.
Do you remember the guy with the trains? I can't remember his name now.
Oh yeah. And now he's like does big marketing deals with companies.
Rocking Gucci.
Yeah.
I think
he did like a shoot. Yeah,
you did.
Internet's crazy.
Yeah.
No, it is good though, because like even though it might be weird to some people, there would be the people out there who come across it will resonate with you the most, and that's
100%
the most important thing.
Yeah, hope so.
Yeah, and then so you're moving into this new space. What's kind of your like next few years wanting to look like? Do you have like I don't know, maybe we can't say that you want to leave broadcasting if you're like, boss, here's this or whatever, but like, do you have like a time where you're ready to go, or do you think you'll keep it going?
Oh, look, I love what I do now, but I'm 100% ready now to, in fact, I've you mentioned my social channels. Like I started my social channels and I had a blog as well. I think that ironically short form video content is reaching more people than written stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to say like the medium's dying, but different audiences for different people. But my goal over the next couple of years is to bare bones, basic level is just get involved with the space and help other people. So I think tomorrow, over the weekend, I don't know yet because I haven't heard the email. I think I'm just going to go hand out coffees as part of this kind of weekend, help people understand that their life is not, completely screwed. There's someone handing out coffee sort of thing. So just getting involved with some organizations who are doing great things. You mentioned the Happiness Co. Like they are.
Yeah, shout out to Julian and Happiness
Co.
Shout
out to Julian because he needs more advertising, doesn't he?
Yeah. No, he's done well. He brought us all together. Well.
Yeah. But the space is so good. I think that there's no real agenda bias here. It's just people helping other people, which I think is cool. So get involved with that. And obviously I have a talk which I've put together, which is really about what we've spoken about here. It's redefining what a life well lived looks like and how we can have a more healthy relationship with our thoughts and feelings. So do those two things and just make a positive impact in the space. There is a part of me that thinks I want to become a psychologist.
Yeah, you mentioned that 4 years study. Can you do it?
But my big thing, and you're probably the same, is how can I use what I've got to impact this space in a really positive way. And I think that me getting out there and speaking to people, putting weird things on, is going to have the biggest impact. So
yeah,
if there's a a company that's listening right now who wants someone to do some stuff for them, I'd be more than down to do anything, really, just because I think the space is so good. It's great.
yeah. It is awesome, and the impact that you can have, like you said, a life well lived, which is true. I don't think people even think about that.
Yeah, but we
You
think
kind of float around.
We think, well, everyone I speak to about a life well lived, I ask people, I mean, at the conference, I asked people, I said, oh yeah, it's, these really good experiences, and it's a big family, and going on a trip and having a great wife. And I said to someone, I'm like, well, where's all the shit? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, where's all the uncomfortable, difficult things? And they said, well, that's not a life well lived. I'm like, oh, bro, you're wrong. That's what a life well lived is. It's everything, a full human experience. So yeah, I'm probably giving away my whole talk to you right now, but yeah. So that's where I'm moving into, and yeah, gives me opportunity to have a chat to guys like you who are doing great stuff as well. And
it's exciting. Oh, I think we've covered a lot of things. I think my biggest takeaway personally, reconnect with action. It's a good little reframe, and I don't know, just the whole adding a personality to your emotions as if it's a separate entity. That's, I don't know, I've thought of it, but it's just in my mind so clear right now. So I appreciate you giving me the conversation to get that thought. And that's literally why I do this. I said this before we chatted, but the whole point of my podcast is about having conversations that provoke thoughts. Because the spreading of information through like this type of medium, that's how change is created. And like, I think if you've got the right conversations with the right people that invoke the right thoughts and feelings, you'll change behaviors and actions. And like, that's just super cool to me. So it's like, everyone listening to this is already, operating at a certain level. So it's the more people, the better. And I appreciate the chat. It's been awesome. Where can people find you?
So look up So Here's a Thought on Instagram, on TikTok. I have a blog page under the same name, so here's a thought.com.au, I think, where I put up sort of short, long form content about different psychological ideas. But yeah, hit me up on the socials at So Here's a Thought, and yeah.
That's it. Cool. I'll have it all below anyway, but that's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries at all. We'll leave it there. Thanks, man.